There's been a lot of talk recently going into the details of how to potentially change the NRL. And one topic that constantly gets brought up over the last couple of years, in and about it every 3 to 6 month period, is the discussion of an NRL draft system. For years, we have seen teams being at the top for too long and at the bottom for too long, and people bring up the idea of an NRL draft being a great equalizer to help teams at the bottom try to work their way back up to the top, similarly how they have it in America and also the AFL. But the real question is, can the NRL draft actually work? Obviously, the big positives that come out of the NRL draft would obviously be that it is meant to be the equalizer that comes to teams that have not gone well recently, getting the best up-and-coming talent. But I do think that it's going to be interesting how they're going to try to organize this, because Junior Rugby League has already set itself as feeder systems to the NRL club, so you'd be dismantling something that's been going on for a very long time, and it's a very major change to say at the very least. Like, for example, NRL fans, I don't think are very susceptible to change. They like to keep things the way they are. And something that coming into this thing, which besides from the AFL is a very American concept, is something that just kind of just shows how the NRL might be continually moving into the so-called NFL route of running a sports organization. So this to me is like the major problem that comes with deciding on how the draft system will work, because you basically have to be dismantling an entire system and try to figure out what happens. Because obviously I feel like the big problem with this draft, if it did ever become a thing, would be that the NRL really isn't like the only mainstream place in rugby league where you can go. When it comes to the other sports that have draft systems, say like the American football, baseball, hockey, and Aussie rules, all of their sports are predominantly played in one country. Like, I understand the whole world champions and all that, but it does also help that besides from the AFL, it's all, for most of the sports, it is where the main focus is for players trying to make it professionally. Now, I do understand that, for example, in American football, there is the Canadian Football League, which is usually where players go when they're not drafted. There's also baseball in Asia, which is very popular. But when it comes to the NRL, I feel like it's going to be a bit of an interesting thing. Like, I know that the English Super League, I know it's probably, a lot of people would probably consider that it's not on the same level as the NRL, but it does also become a thing of at what point does the English Super League just become a glorified feeder system to the NRL for undrafted players. And also another main thing that should be of concern of like how this may not work is the fact that out of all the sports, the NRL have probably like one of the lowest squad numbers. Because when you're talking about something like baseball and NFL, where they have baseball has like about 40 players in a roster. Bloody NFL probably have about 100 to say the least. AFL got about probably 50. It's a bit, when there's only 30, it's making already spots like really hard. And also salary caps are going to have to change for that, which is, I feel, is going to be another problem with trying to facilitate a league trying to facilitate a system like this. Is obviously the salary cap would have to increase. But then there also becomes a thing is, how do rugby league players out of high school or in high school show themselves to these scouts? Yes, you've got probably like the private school system when they play rugby league and all that, because when players actually get, scholarships to go play for them. But aside from that, it's kind of also against the point, because obviously NRL portrays itself as like a game for like the working class, like obviously not the rich, like it's not a posh regarded sport, obviously compared to union. Like, one big example would be they used to have the Australian schoolboys. I remember back in the day, in like Saturday mornings or just into afternoons, you'd see some of the Sydney high schools play each other at I think it was at like an ANZ Stadium once. It was a good thing, and it just made me really question why they got rid of it. So But then a major thing that will also happen is what happened to those players, because there's a lot of players that would play in this schoolboy system. What happens to the others that don't make it? So there needs to be some other, not saying like a second division, but there needs to be something as well. Like I know you got the New South Wales Cup, but it just becomes a more complex issue. And this is when it comes to the question on whether or not I think an NRL draft system would work. I think there's just too much that needs to be changed for it to be actually implemented, personally. So those are my ramblings and thoughts about can an NRL draft system actually work? What do you guys think? Do you think it is a possibility that it could happen in the next couple of years? What do you think that needs to be implemented for that to work? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all later.